Shalom and welcome. This episode will cover from Shem to Peleg, son of Eber. Let's quickly recap the origins of Semites, beginning with Natufians to Proto-Semites. The Natufian culture is a late Epipaleolithic archaeological culture of the Levant, dating to around 15,000 to 11,500 years ago. The culture was unusual in that it supported a sedentary or semi-sedentary population, even before the introduction of agriculture. The Natufian communities may be the ancestors of the first builders of the first Neolithic settlements in the region, which may have been the earliest in the world. According to Christy G. Turner II, there is archaeological and physical anthropological reason for a relationship between the modern Semitic-speaking populations of the Levant and the Natufian culture. According to the genetic analysis done on 6 Natufian remains from northern Israel, the Natufians carried the Y DNA haplogroup E-Z830, a somewhat upwind clade of E-M123, and therefore ancestral to it. The Natufians were one of the first settled peoples in the world and may have contributed to the domestication of certain crops and thus the advent of agriculture. The discovery of E-Z830 without other clades suggests an indigenous presence in Canaan and Israel that predates all other clades, which are not known to have existed in the region at the time, 10,000 years before present. According to the paper titled The Prehistory of Language from the Perspective of the Y Chromosome, it reads, in the 2005 book, First Farmers, The Origins of Agriculture Societies by Peter Bellwood, provides an excellent resource for linguists who wish to explore the worldwide correlation between the origins of agriculture and the expansion of languages. In Chapter 3 of the book, page 44 through 66, he explores the origins of agriculture in Southwest Asia, focusing on a region often identified in the literature as the Fertile Crescent. This region encompasses parts of contemporary Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. The transition to agriculture in the Fertile Crescent was facilitated by the domestication of cereals such as wheat and barley, and legumes such as chickpeas and lentils from wild sources. Additionally, the agricultural transition in the Fertile Crescent involved the domestication of goats and sheep. The success of agriculture in Southwest Asia partly stems from improved climatic conditions following the last ice age. Another factor that ensured the success of this transition was the development of pottery. Prior to the adoption of agriculture in Southwest Asia, and elsewhere in the world for that matter, the human tribe practiced hunter-gatherer techniques in order to survive. The evolution of agricultural in Southwest Asia generally follows a series of cultural transitions that begin with the Natufians, followed by the pre-pottery Neolithic A and pre-pottery Neolithic B, and then finally the development of pottery itself. The Natufians stand as an important cultural transition because they were the last hunter-gatherers in the Middle East. The Natufians appeared near the Sea of Galilee in what is now present-day Israel. Bar Yosef paints a picture of everyday Natufian life, which centered on hunting of gazelles and other animals. Moreover, and more specifically, he reports that they practice intensive and extensive harvesting of wild cereals that grew abundantly in the region at the time. According to the description provided by Bellwood in 2005, this abundant supply of food allowed the Natufians to construct semi-permanent settlements, something that is unusual for hunter-gatherers. These cultures are generally nomadic. People began to domesticate the wild cereals and legumes that their Natufian ancestors had previously gathered. The pre-pottery Neolithic A cultures stand as an initial Southwest Asian culture that embraced this new development. They and their descendants thrived, and by around 10,500 years ago, large farming settlements appeared, such as the one at Abu Huraira in northern Syria. This development signaled the evolution of another cultural transition in the region, the pre-pottery Neolithic B. One of the significant innovations that occurred during this period was the development of pastoralism and herding of goats and sheep, which were once wild animals that people had managed to domesticate. About 9,000 years ago, the development of pottery ushered in a new cultural transition in Southwest Asia. This development allowed people to cook their food more efficiently and facilitated the storage of grain after harvesting. Around this time, the climate in Southwest Asia also became more arid. According to Bellwood in 2005, this change in climate was accompanied by deforestation of human settlements had brought, as well as less productive soil due to over-farming. These conditions caused many people in Southwest Asia to abandon sedentary crop agriculture. Instead of cultivating crops, they turned to sheep and goat herding as a food source. By around 6.4 thousand years ago, some of these Southwest Asian pastoralists herded their goats and sheep out of the region into Egypt. Harifian is a specialized regional cultural development of the Epipaleolithic of Negev Desert. It corresponds to the latest stages of the Natufian culture. According to the book titled Early Pastoral Nomadicism and the Settlement of Lower Mesopotamia, Harifian has close connections with the late Mesolithic cultures of Phylum and the eastern deserts of Egypt, whose tool assemblages resemble that of the Harifian. Fusion with animal domestication elements of pre-pottery Neolithic B, PPNB culture is hypothesized by Jairus Zarins to have led to the Circum-Arabian nomadic pastoral complex, a group of cultures that invented nomadic pastoralism. It may have been the original culture which spread Proto-Semitic languages throughout the region. Pre-pottery Neolithic B is part of the Pre-pottery Neolithic, a Neolithic culture centered in Upper Mesopotamia and the Levant. Like their early PPNA people, the PPNB culture developed from the Mesolithic Natufian culture. Work at the site of Ain Ghazel in Jordan has indicated a later pre-pottery Neolithic C period, which existed between 8,200 and 7,900 BP. Jairus Zarins has proposed that a Circum-Arabian nomadic pastoral complex developed in the period from the climactic crisis of 6,200 BC, partly as a result of an increasing emphasis on PPNB cultures upon animal domesticates and a fusion with Harifian hunter-gatherers in southern Palestine, with affiliated connections with the cultures of Phylum in the eastern desert of Egypt. Cultures practicing this lifestyle spread down the Red Sea shoreline and moved east from Syria into southern Iraq. Ain Ghazel is a Neolithic archaeological site located in metropolitan Amman, Jordan. The settlements at Ain Ghazel first appeared in the Middle Pre-pottery Neolithic B. Y-DNA haplogroup E1B1B1B2 has been found in 75% of the Ain Ghazel population, along with 60% of PPNB populations, and is present in all three stages of PPNB and in most Natufians. More recently, Jairus Zarins has suggested that the development of a Circum-Arabian nomadic pastoral complex of cultures developed in the period of the 6,200 BCE climactic crisis, stretching from southern Palestine down the Red Sea shoreline and northeastward into Syria and Iraq, spread Proto-Semitic languages through the region. This complex may have developed from the fusion of Harifian and pre-pottery Neolithic B cultures in southern Palestine. And according to the paper titled Bayesian Phylogenetic Analysis of Semitic Languages Identifies an Early Bronze Age Origin of Semitic in the Near East, and it reads, we estimate that Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin approximately 5,750 years before present in the Levant, followed by an expansion of Akkadian into Mesopotamia. Now let's harmonize everything. After the flood, Shem would have left the Ark and settled the Levant. Shem's Stone Age descendants would be the Natufians and related populations. From Natufians would come PP&A, PP&C, and PP&B cultures. Natufians and their Neolithic Levantine descendants were the first agriculturalists and the first to domesticate sheep and goats. PP&B and Harifians in the Levant created the Proto-Semites. Proto-Semites formed in 6200 BC. Then Proto-Semites will expand from the Levant into Mesopotamia and Arabia around 3750 BC, the early Bronze Age. When Semites expanded from the Levant, Abraham's ancestors could have been among those migrants. I believe the expansion of Proto-Semites in the early Bronze Age happened around the time of Peleg, because his name means division. And in the days of Peleg, the earth was divided, which could represent migration or expansion. Furthermore, Peleg has a brother named Joktan, and his descendants are Arabians. Around this time of the early Bronze Age, Semites were also migrating from the Levant into Arabia, which fits well with Joktan. Therefore, both Joktan and Peleg could have lived in this time period of expansion of Semites from the Levant into Mesopotamia and Arabia. Therefore, Peleg and Joktan likely lived in the early Bronze Age. Therefore, Abraham's ancestors, which could be early descendants of Peleg, could have left the Levant in this time and migrated into Mesopotamia. Therefore, I would say that Peleg lived in the early Bronze Age, whereas Abraham would live in the Middle Bronze Age. Now, understanding the ancestors of Semites is pretty important if we are to understand the cultural and genetic background of Abraham and the Israelites. One thing that I find fascinating about the Natufians and their early descendants, the fact that they were the first agriculturalists and pastoralists, is that the patriarchs and the matriarchs essentially were the same thing. But this makes sense because the Natufians passed down their language and their culture and obviously their genes to their descendants, who would be Semitic populations such as Abraham. According to the article titled The Pastoral Lifestyle of Abraham and His Family, it reads, anthropological studies of this period and region suggest the families in these narratives practice a mixed semi-nomadic pastoralism and herdsman husbandry. Because a family could not be entirely supported through shepherd herding, it was necessary to practice local agriculture and trade with those living in more settled communities. Pastoral nomads cared for sheep and goats to obtain milk and meat, wool and other goods made from animal products such as leather. Donkeys carried loads, and camels were especially suited for long-range travel. The patriarchal narratives repeatedly mentioned the great wealth of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Shepherd herding and animal husbandry were honorable fields of work and could be lucrative, and Abraham's family became very wealthy.